I made a mistake when I was 26 that took me years to fully understand. Not a dramatic mistake, not the kind that ruins your life or sends everything spiraling. Just a quiet, confident, completely logical mistake that cost me more than I realized for longer than I want to admit. I had 2 job offers on the table at the same time. The first one paid $87,000. It was at a well-known financial firm downtown. Prestigious name, real office, the kind of place where you told people where you worked and they nodded with a specific kind of respect. The role was demanding. They were upfront about that. Long hours, high expectations, a culture that prided itself on intensity. But $87,000 at 26, that felt like proof that I was doing something right. The second one paid $61,000. It was at a smaller advisory firm. Nobody had heard of them. The office was fine but unremarkable. The role was broader, less defined, more about figuring things out as you went. They offered flexibility, reasonable hours, the kind of environment where people seemed to actually like each other. I took the $87,000 job without agonizing over it for very long, because $87,000 was larger than $61,000, and larger is better. That's not even a financial decision. That's arithmetic. 3 years later, I left that job exhausted, with $23,000 in savings and a vague but persistent feeling that I had been running very fast in the wrong direction. A colleague who had taken a similar offer to the smaller firm around the same time, someone I'd stayed in loose contact with, had $89,000 saved, was making $94,000 a year, had just negotiated a partial remote arrangement, seemed from every external indicator significantly less tired than I was. Same starting point, same city, same industry. 3 years later, completely different financial reality. I sat down one evening and tried to understand what had actually happened. Not emotionally, mathematically, I got out a piece of paper and started writing down every number I could think of. And what I found on that piece of paper changed the way I think about compensation permanently. It changed the way I advise every client who comes to me with an offer letter in their hand. And it's what I want to walk you through today. Because salary is one of the most misleading numbers in personal finance, and almost nobody tells you that before you sign. I'm Elizabeth, a financial advisor, and today I want to show you exactly how to think about what a job actually pays, not what the offer letter says it pays. Let me start with what I found on that piece of paper. I had made $87,000 a year for 3 years. Total gross income over that period, $261,000. My colleague had made roughly $63,000 average over the same period, with a raise in year 2. Total gross income, $189,000. I had earned $72,000 more than her over 3 years, and yet she had $66,000 more saved than I did. The gap between what I should have had and what I actually had was $138,000. Where did it go? The first place I looked was the commute. The downtown firm required me to be in the office 5 days a week. The commute was 45 minutes each way on a good day, an hour and 15 on a bad one. I'll use the conservative number, 45 minutes each way, 250 working days a year. That's 375 hours a year sitting in traffic or on public transit. Over 3 years, 1,125 hours. More than 46 full days of my life spent commuting. But it's not just the time, it's the money. Monthly transit pass, $127. Parking on the days I drove averaged another $80 a month. Over 3 years, roughly $7,500 just in transportation costs to get to a building and back. My colleague worked 5 minutes from her apartment in year 1, then went partially remote in year 2. Her transportation costs for work purposes over 3 years, negligible. Then I looked at work clothes. The downtown firm had a dress code, not formal but professional, which meant I was maintaining a wardrobe that I would not have maintained otherwise. Conservative estimate, $1,200 a year in work-specific clothing, dry cleaning, shoes that were appropriate for that environment. Over 3 years, $3,600. Her firm was business casual at best. She wore things she already owned. Her work wardrobe spent over 3 years. Close to zero. Then lunch. When you work downtown, you eat downtown. The culture at that firm was that people went out for lunch, not every day, but often enough. Average lunch spend, $16 a day on the days I bought food, which was most days. Annual cost, roughly $3,500. Over 3 years, $10,500. Her situation, she brought lunch most days because the area around her office didn't have many options, and she'd fallen into the habit early. Annual food spend at work, maybe $400 in the occasional purchase. Over 3 years, $1,200. Difference, $9,300. I was already at $20,000 in direct cost differences, and I hadn't gotten to the harder numbers yet. Then I looked at benefits. The prestigious firm offered health insurance, but it was a high deductible plan with a relatively high employee contribution. I was paying $280 a month in premiums, and my deductible was $2,800. In a year where I had 2 significant medical expenses, one dental, one a specialist visit, I paid nearly $3,200 out of pocket between premiums and costs before the deductible cleared. Her firm offered a lower deductible plan with a higher employer contribution. Her premium was $95 a month. Her out-of-pocket maximum was substantially lower. In equivalent years, she was spending roughly $1,400 annually on health-related costs. Annual difference? Roughly $1,800. Over 3 years, $5,400. Then the 401k matching. My firm matched 3% of salary up to a limit. On $87,000, that was $2,610 per year in employer contributions. Real money. Her firm matched 5% with no cap up to the IRS contribution limit. On $63,000, that was $3,150 per year in employer contributions. More real money, despite the lower salary. Over 3 years, she received $540 more in employer 401k contributions than I did. Not a huge number, but it's money that came directly from the compensation package that the salary figure alone obscured entirely. I had now accounted for roughly $26,000 in direct calculable differences. Money I had spent or not received that had nothing to do with lifestyle choices or discipline or investment strategy, just the structural costs and benefits of the 2 jobs, quantified. But I hadn't gotten to the hardest number yet, the one that doesn't show up in any spreadsheet. Time. Not commute time, which I'd already counted. Total time. My job required roughly 55 hours a week. That was the culture. That was the expectation. Nobody said it out loud, but everybody understood it. The people who left at 5:30 were noticed. The people who were still sending emails at 8 p.m. were the ones who got promoted. 55 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. That's 2,750 hours a year spent working. Her job was 40 hours. Hard stop. The culture valued output, not presence. Nobody stayed late because staying late wasn't how success was defined there. 40 hours a week, 50 weeks, 2,000 hours a year. I was working 750 more hours per year than she was. Over 3 years, 2,250 hours. Nearly 94 full days. Now, here's where it gets interesting. My effective hourly rate, $87,000 divided by 2,750 hours, was $31.64 per hour. Her effective hourly rate, $63,000 divided by 2,000 hours, was $31.50 per hour. We were making essentially the same amount per hour of our lives that we actually gave to our jobs. The $24,000 salary difference was almost entirely explained by the fact that I was working 37% more hours. I wasn't being paid more, I was working more. And because I was working more, I had less time for everything else. Which brings me to the cost that nobody ever calculates. The one I'm most convinced matters most in the long run. Depleted capacity. When I got home at 7 or 7:30 in the evening, after a 10 or 11-hour day plus a commute, I had nothing left. Not nothing left in a dramatic way. Just the quiet, ordinary exhaustion of someone who has spent all of their mental energy already. I watched television, I scrolled, I recovered. I was not building anything in those evening hours. I was not learning anything. I was not exploring anything. I was not starting anything. My colleague, home by 5:30 with a 40-hour week and no commute, had roughly 2 to 3 hours of genuine cognitive capacity every evening that I simply did not have. Over 3 years, she used some of that time to take an online course in financial modeling that made her significantly more valuable in her field. She used some of it to start a small consulting project that brought in an additional $8,000 over 2 years. She used some of it to read, to think, to stay curious about her industry in a way that kept accelerating her career. None of that shows up on a salary comparison, but all of it compounded into her financial life in ways that were very real by the end of year 3. The $24,000 salary difference I had chosen was not buying me $24,000 of additional value. It was buying me 750 extra hours of work per year, $20,000 in additional costs, and a depleted version of myself who had nothing left to build with after hours. She had chosen the smaller number and gotten the better deal. Now let me talk about something that takes longer to see, but matters even more in the long run. Career trajectory. The prestigious firm was prestigious for a reason, the name opened doors, the training was rigorous, the standards were high. I learned things there that I would not have learned elsewhere, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. But the role was narrow, very specialized, optimized for depth in one specific area of financial services. The skills I was building were valuable, but they were valuable primarily within a specific context. The further I went down that path, the more my value was tied to staying in that world. Her role was broad, generalist. She was doing things that were above her official pay grade from the beginning because the firm was small enough that everyone wore multiple hats. She was seeing parts of the business that someone at her level at a larger firm would never be exposed to. She was building a toolkit that was applicable across a wide range of contexts. In year 2, she was offered a role at a larger firm because of the breadth of her experience. She negotiated. She got $84,000, a $21,000 increase from where she'd started. I got a modest raise in year 2 that brought me to $91,000. Solid. But the gap between us had closed from $24,000 to $7,000 in 2 years, without her doing anything except choosing a job that gave her broader exposure and more opportunity to grow. By the end of year 3, when I left exhausted with $23,000 saved, she was at $94,000 and accelerating. The trajectory of her career had bent upward in a way that mine had not, largely because the soil she had been planted in was more fertile for growth. This is the thing about career trajectory that most people understand intellectually, but fail to weight properly when they're evaluating an offer. Salary today is not salary forever. The job that pays more today is not necessarily the job that pays more in 5 years. And the job that pays less today but teaches more, exposes you to more, gives you more room to grow. That job is making a very specific bet on your behalf. A bet that your skills and value will compound faster than they would in the higher paying but more constrained alternative. Sometimes that bet doesn't pay off. Sometimes the prestigious firm turns out to be the right choice after all. I'm not saying the $60,000 job is always the right answer. I'm saying that when you're evaluating an offer, the salary is one data point. The trajectory is a different data point. And the trajectory often matters more over a 5 to 10 year horizon than the starting number. Let me talk about stress, because this is the one that people acknowledge and then immediately discount, as if it's a soft consideration rather than a financial one. It is a financial consideration, directly and measurably. Chronic workplace stress, the kind that comes from a high-intensity, high-demand environment where the expectations never fully let up, costs money in ways that are easy to overlook until you add them up. Therapy. I started seeing a therapist in year 2, not because I was in crisis, because I was managing enough ambient stress that having someone to process it with felt necessary rather than optional. $150 a session, twice a month, $3,600 a year, vacations to recover, not vacations to enjoy, vacations to recover. There's a difference. When you genuinely need time off to return to baseline functioning, you tend to spend more on that time off because the bar for what counts as restorative is higher. I spent more on travel during those 3 years than I had in the previous 3 years combined. The spending that happens when you're depleted and you're trying to feel better, the nicer dinner because you had a brutal week, The thing you bought online at 11 p.m. because your brain needed a small hit of something pleasant. The convenience spending, the food delivery, the things you paid someone else to do because you didn't have the capacity that you wouldn't have done if you'd had more bandwidth. I'm not going to give you a precise number for all of this because the numbers are imprecise and I don't want to manufacture false specificity. But when I looked honestly at my spending patterns across those 3 years versus what I would have spent in a lower stress environment, the difference was real and it was significant. Stress costs money. Not as a metaphor, literally, in dollars that leave your account and don't come back. And the job that pays $30,000 more but costs you $15,000 in stress-related spending is not the job that pays $30,000 more. It's the job that pays $15,000 more. At best, the last thing I want to talk about is the hardest to quantify and the most important. Optionality. The $90,000 job closes doors while it's opening them. It takes so much of you, your time, your energy, your cognitive bandwidth, that you become less able to see and act on opportunities that exist outside of it. When you're working 55 hours a week and commuting and depleted by 7 p.m., you are not a person who is available to notice things, to explore things, to start things, to respond to unexpected opportunities with any kind of genuine engagement. You are a person who is managing your current situation. That's all you have capacity for. The $60,000 job, if it's structured well, leaves you with something that is genuinely undervalued in most career conversations. Room. Room to notice, room to explore, room to say yes to something unexpected without your entire life needing to reorganize around it. My colleague took on a small consulting project in year 2, not because she had a grand plan, but because someone asked her if she was available, and she was. She had the bandwidth, she had the evenings, she had the mental space to say yes and then actually follow through. I would have said yes and then failed to follow through because I had already spent everything I had before the project even started. Optionality has a financial value that is difficult to calculate in advance, but becomes very obvious in retrospect. Every unexpected opportunity you're too exhausted to take. Every skill you meant to build but never had the energy for. Every pivot you could have made but couldn't because you were too deep in the current path to see anything else. These are not hypothetical losses. They are real costs. Real money that didn't get earned, real career trajectory that didn't happen, real compounding that never started. The $60,000 job that leaves you with room to be a full human being with cognitive capacity after 5 p.m. is not a consolation prize. It is, in many cases, the better financial decision, even before you account for all the direct costs I described earlier. I want to be honest about something before I close. I don't regret everything about my choice. The prestigious firm taught me things I use every day. The intensity of that environment built a kind of professional resilience that has served me well. There were real benefits that don't show up in the financial calculation. But I made that choice for one reason. $87,000 was larger than $61,000. And that reason alone was not sufficient. It was not a complete analysis. It was a number in the absence of context, and I treated it as if context didn't exist. Every client who comes to me now with 2 offer letters, I ask them to do one thing before they decide. Add up the real compensation. Not just the salary. The salary minus commute costs, work clothes, transportation, meals, the difference in benefits, plus the 401k match, plus an honest assessment of the hours, divided by those hours to get effective hourly rate. Plus a realistic look at where each path goes in 3 years, plus an honest accounting of what high stress costs you specifically, because that number is different for every person. When you do that full calculation, the answer is often different from what the offer letters suggested. Sometimes the $90,000 job still wins. Often it doesn't. But at least you're making the decision with the real numbers in front of you. Not the numbers someone put on a letter to get you to sign. The real ones. I'm Elizabeth. If this changed how you're going to evaluate your next offer, share it with someone who has one on their desk right now. They need to see the full picture before they decide. And I'll see you in the next one.